ActionSA is proposing hard labour as a mandatory penalty for convicted rapists and murderers. The party's national spokesperson, Lerato Ngobeni, says this is to deter would-be criminals from committing the same crimes. The proposed policy forms part of 10 others that will be debated during the party's inaugural policy conference to be held in Boksburg next week.
Offended society in such grave ways can also, to redeem themselves, give back to society. We don't want people to have remnants of Madiba, for example, when he had to just do menial hard labor that meant nothing, that was meant to break his spirit, working in the quarry. We're talking about people who, if in fact there are needs for infrastructure projects, there is grass cutting that needs to be done at different spaces of the state, for example, at police stations. And so where we are coming from is to say, if in fact you would like us as society to give you a second chance, then you must demonstrate that you are willing to give back to society in the same way that you have taken away from society.
Let's discuss the proposal by ActionSA with the South African Human Rights Commissioner, Chris Nissen. Chris, a very good evening to you. Thank you so much for being on Newzroom Afrika. Excuse me. So what ActionSA is saying here is that they're not proposing that inmates or convicted offenders be abused, but rather that they give back to society, either by being made to work on community projects, the cutting of grass, helping in construction, etc., but within the confines of South African constitutional law. Is there merit to this proposal?
Well, the thing is this, obviously you must understand that once a person has been sentenced for whatever he or she has done, and then we must respect the outcome of the court rulings in terms of the sentence given to that person. Within correctional services, they've got rehabilitative corrective programs, and that's important. What we do agree with is that, yes, there must be some other form of community services, but hard labor, no. That is not on, as been said earlier on, that, you know, our late President Nelson Mandela has been saying that when he was on the island, in which they were forced to do hard labor. In the past, we had colonial, hard labor introduced into prisons and even for children in conflict with the law. No, that is not on. But what we do think we should be doing is that we must find a humane activities for those who have already been sentenced by the court of law in order for them to activate. For example, you've been mentioning maybe cutting of law, making useful. There are such programs within correctional services that they can engage in. But hard labor, going back to the old colonial past, it's not working.
Right. And yesterday, before these examples by ActionSA were heard by a lot of people, just the phrase hard labor concerned people, and some of the people who were commenting on this said that by definition, there's no way in 2023 or democratic South Africa, hard labor is a phrase that any political party should be throwing around when it comes to the Justice and Correctional Services Department. So I wonder if perhaps with ActionSA the error was just in the language, or the concept as a whole is something that we should all be condemning if it's mentioned.
Look, the issue about hard labor, it is a colonial concept that worked during apartheid as well, and did not bring any corrective behavior. And so hard labor is not in any way going to help with corrective behavior. What we need, and we need to support the Department of Correctional Services in their program of changing the human behavior. And changing human behavior does not need hard labor. Changing human behavior is to say, how best can we change your character and your behavior in becoming a very useful citizen when you leave the correctional center after you completed your sentence. In there, of course, you must also understand within the correctional service centers, people get influenced by all sorts of other influences because of the nature of being incarcerated. If you go to certain centers, there are the gangs and the number gangs and all of those kind of things. So hard labor is not an answer. What is an answer is to how do we change the behavior of that person and the character of that person, and that person to become a useful citizen when he or she leaves that center, and in fact contribute towards society once he or she leaves. But in the meantime, correctional services do have programs where they involve people in terms of different functions, whether it's the educational, whether it's developmental, or whether it's working on the farms, because they do have a number of correctional services. Centers have got farms, whether it's from cash crops to livestock and so on, and offenders are allowed to work on those farms, and they're already working on it and so on. So hard labor goes to the very core of colonial penal system that we don't need in this country.
I do wonder, though, Chris, if it does not speak to the sentiment in South African society that people who are in South African correctional services centers, inmates, convicted rapists, murderers, fraudsters, and the broader criminal spectrum, there is a perception in society that a lot of them are basically living it up on the taxpayer's dime and that they're basically not being punished. But even correctional services says that's not its main mandate, right? Excuse me, I don't know why I'm struggling with my voice. They say that's not their main mandate. In fact, theirs is to rehabilitate. And the perception, I wonder, that prison is a free time on the taxpayer's dime. How true is that?
You know, Section 135 of the Constitution clearly defines how a person who's incarcerated, whether it's the police station and or in a correctional center, be dealt with, if I could use that word, but meaning how they should be treated. So, and I really wish that somebody would go and see for a day in the life of a person in correctional centers. I visit correctional centers throughout the country. You are locked up for 23 hours. You only have 1 hour exercise. And the food, every time if they complain to me about the food, not the quality, but the amount of food that they get. I also feel it for youngsters, because young people eat more than older people. And so the same minimum is prescribed in terms of quantity. So to say that, you know, at the taxpayers' money, these people have been sentenced. And we must thank the criminal justice system for ensuring that people who commit a crime, that they are sentenced and given an appropriate sentence. People in prison or in correctional centers, as we call them, it's not a holiday. I'm sorry to say that. I see them, I meet them, I see them on a daily basis when I meet with them and so on. And the fact that you cut off from your community, you are paying for what you've done. You are paying through the criminal justice system. You are paying, being incarcerated for the number of years that you are there with limited, very limited rights, and all your freedom is curtailed. So no, please, let's understand that throughout the world there are correctional centers. And when you engage in crime and you are corrected through a criminal justice system by giving a sentence, you have to pay for what you have done. And so it's not and I hear people saying it's a holiday. It's not a holiday inn. I promise you, when I see these offenders, when I meet with them and talk to them, from young to old, it's not a nice place to be. And I always say, this is not your home. Please, when you leave, do not come back here.
South African Human Rights Commissioner Chris Nissen, good to speak to you. Thank you so much for your time tonight.